Hi, Stefan Spencer here. I'm so excited to have Dr. David Perlmutter here as my guest in today's episode. Dr. Perlmutter is a board-certified neurologist, a four-time New York Times bestselling author. He serves on the board of directors and is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition. His new book is Brainwash. You may have already heard of his book, Grain Brain, that was a huge New York Times bestselling book. And we're going to focus on how to improve your brain and focus specifically on this new book, Brainwash. Dr. Perlmutter, it's great to have you on the show.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. Delighted to be here.
So I understand that Brainwash is a huge game-changing book from your perspective. Let's let our listeners in on why that's the case.
Well, most of my writing over the years has been in the area of chronic degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and, throwing a wider net to things like diabetes, cancer, coronary artery disease, et cetera, and really has leveraged the state-of-the-art information as it relates to diet, other lifestyle choices like exercise, sleep, et cetera, in terms of how these factors influence a person's risk for these chronic conditions. Mostly, of course, focused on the brain. My son and I, a couple of years ago, were right where I'm sitting right now, we were talking, and he is a physician as well. He's an internal medicine specialist. And we're talking about what is the most frustrating part about our time practicing medicine. We realize that, we do everything we possibly can to learn as much information as we can. We go to every conference we can. We read all the journals. We talk to people. We learn what we think is the very best information. That's step one. Step two is that we then do our very best to convey that information to the general public, to the one-on-one when we're seeing patients. And then that depends on step three. What is step three? And that is then those individuals receiving the information, taking advantage of it, and making new decisions, making decisions based on what we've told them, what we've given to them. And what we've learned is that's where the breakdown occurs. And that's the part of the flow chart that no one pays any attention to, is that part of the bridge between information and action. So we explored then what is it that's keeping people from making these choices. You want to lose weight. You want your blood sugar to be lower. You know that your blood pressure can come down if you engage in meditation, for example. But, about 80% of what we were telling people and what doctors in general tell people is ignored. So we began looking at what it is that is involved with people understanding things and then making those decisions. And what we learned was really very interesting, and this is really kind of the focal point of Brainwash. And that is that we make decisions really primarily out of the influence of two different areas of the brain. And there's a bit of a power struggle going on between, on the one hand, the prefrontal cortex up here, that is involved in decision making, looking at the long game, looking at how our decisions are not going to be affecting us in the next 10 minutes, but how they're going to affect us in a day, a week, 10 years from now, planning for the future, versus the amygdala, the more primitive part of the brain that deals with impulsivity, that says, I'm going to just do this right now as an instantaneous response. So it's really a reflexive versus a reflective type of mentality. And that got us going. And that, during the course of our research to write Brainwash, we realized that so many of our lifestyle choices affect our ability to either bring online the prefrontal cortex, plan for the future, be more empathetic, be more compassionate, versus the amygdala, being more narcissistic, being more impulsive. How so many of our lifestyle choices will choose for us whether we're going to be able to, use our prefrontal cortex or be locked into acting like a reptile, basically. And it's been a heck of a ride, because what influences our ability to make good choices are things like getting a good night's sleep, physical exercise, a low inflammatory type diet, meditation, relationships with other people, and even exposure to nature. And the constellation of, in the aggregate, these events really is either changing us for the better or for the worse. And that's what went into writing this new book. And we realized that, one of the biggest players that's affecting how people make decisions, in other words, raising their level of inflammation and locking them into making poor decisions, is the standard American diet, the Westernization of our diet. And when we recognize that the Western diet is spreading to all corners of the globe and affecting people's decision making and affecting levels of empathy, turning down levels of empathy and enhancing fear and enhancing an us versus them mentality, it's a scary proposition. So, we've identified sort of an existential consideration with respect to what's happening to the global diet. The
So
more
would
we
you
eat,
say that people are becoming more narcissistic because of the standard American diet, and we could actually
well,
reverse some of that?
there's never been a study that proves that. So, I mean, we're drawing that as a conclusion based upon what we've studied. We know that narcissism is rampant, as evidenced by studies of narcissism by applying standardized testing of people. Narcissism is increasing dramatically, especially in the college age individuals. But worse than that, I think, is this fear that's being so enhanced in terms of people's perception of the world around them, and this us versus them mentality that, this division amongst people that is so rampant now in our country and between countries as well. So the flames of this, and flames is actually an interesting word because that's where the word inflammation comes from. The flames of this are being fanned by inflammation. We know that inflammation cuts off our connection to that prefrontal cortex. Inflammation cuts us off from that part of the brain that allows us to see things from another person's perspective, to be less fearful in our day-to-day lives and more able to make decisions that think about how that's going to play out in 10 years. That relates to our health, relates to following advice from our physicians, it relates to making lifestyle changes that are good for us, and it relates to our relationship with the planet. So, it throws a wide net. So that said, understanding what's going on just with the change in diet that we're seeing around the planet was really an eye-opening experience. The Westernization of the global diet has absolutely existential implications.
Yeah, I believe that. And so when you wrote the book Grain Brain, and you discussed the issues involving grains and glutens and all that with the impact on our brain and our overall health and performance and quality of thinking and all that. At the time, did you anticipate there would be a follow-on book, this book, Brainwash?
At that time, no. I mean, the natural follow-up book from Grain Brain was the Grain Brain cookbook.
Right.
And then what we began to explore was the interesting relationship between the microbiome, the gut bacteria and their metabolites, and brain health. And we wrote the book Brain Maker, which really explores this relationship between the gut and the brain. Who knew? That was, early on in the experience in terms of understanding how very powerful the microbiome is, not just in brain health, but in total body health, in disease resistance, resilience, and longevity. As you are well aware, over the past few years, that's gotten a huge amount of attention. So after that, then our book was The Grain Brain Whole Life Plan, that began to explore how other things, including diet, but other lifestyle choices, have such a great role to play. I say great because we can leverage these things to obtain better health. And then following that, the revised edition of Grain Brain, the 5-year, what you may call it the anniversary edition. Mm-hmm. And then coming up very, very soon, I've not written, I was the editor-in-chief of a professional book that is called The Microbiome and the Brain, whereby we have 12 different authors from various specialties at some of our Harvard, some of our most well-respected UCLA institutions around the country, each contributing a chapter looking at various, at the lens, through a different lens as to how the gut bacteria influences brain health and resistance to disease. I guess that's part of health. Really fascinating book, comes out very soon, and I served as the editor-in-chief of that book. But these concepts in Brainwash look at our lifestyle choices from the perspective of giving you, the reader, the opportunity to gain more control and to make better decisions. We all read the books. We know basically what to eat. There's some wonderful books out there. Dr. Hyman's written a wonderful new cookbook. We see, Whole 30. There's just some great stuff out there, but all these books are useless until you implement what these really wonderful authors are saying.
Right.
I think a lot of people buy a lot of books, watch a lot of programs, and download a lot of material, but it doesn't help you one lick until you put those things into play. And that's the breakdown.
Right. And I think that's a breakdown that happens not just in our health, but everywhere. Business, for example, I have clients who I have done full, in-depth, comprehensive SEO audits of their websites and all the things that they need to do to rocket their rankings to the top, and they don't implement, and then they don't get the ROI, and then they're not a referenceable client because the results aren't there, and that's very frustrating. So I'm super selective with who I work with because I want them to implement.
It's so true. And as a matter of fact, I was interviewed a couple of days ago, and it was basically about health, but the interviewer is taking some of the information because he does a financial advice kind of podcast as well. And he said, what you just said, Stefan, and that is that, it must be frustrating for anyone giving advice, learned advice, to see the lack of follow through in terms of the client. The client is paying, the patient is paying to receive this advice, and with hopes of results. And both client and the individual purveying the advice are hopeful for a positive outcome.
Right.
It makes both it raises both ships, but the outcome is really predicated on implementation. And it's that part of the brain that we really want to work on, and that is allowing people to connect to the part of the brain that really lets you look at the long game, that lets you follow through on the right health choices that are going to allow you to be resilient and have a long health span and hopefully a long lifespan, or a better financial position, a more sound financial footing if that is your goal. But interestingly enough, what is so troublesome about at least the health sector in terms of making the right choices is the bad choices that people make tend to foster further bad decisions. Why? Because, as I mentioned, what threatens our good decision-making part of the brain, what threatens our ability to connect to that, and we call that disconnection syndrome, is the very thing that is brought on by making bad decisions. In other words, eat the wrong foods, you increase inflammation that distances you from the prefrontal cortex. So what do? You eat the wrong foods. So you create a vicious cycle that is a feed-forward cycle, meaning it gets worse with time. Another example, if you don't get restorative sleep, it increases inflammation. And what do? Then you make bad food choices, and then you gain weight. And what does that do? Worsens your sleep, and there's another feed-forward cycle. We all know that we make not great decisions and have higher levels of impulsivity when we haven't gotten a full night's sleep. We know that. You get jet lagged, you eat whatever. Or if you're under stress, there's something really stressful happening in your life, you're going to make bad food choices. What does that do? Increases inflammation, locks you in to the primitive brain that is impulsive, bad food choices. So all of these things enter in, and we're asking in Brainwash for 10 of your days. For 10, and in each of those days, we are going to focus on things like tonight, get a better night's sleep. How so? Turn off your screen earlier in the day. Don't have caffeine after 2 p.m. Make sure that you don't eat really late or just before you go to sleep. Make your sleeping area, your bedroom, a sanctuary. Cut off any exposure to light and sound as best you can. Turn down the thermostat a couple of degrees. All of these things are geared, as it simply relates to sleep, to giving you not only a longer rest, but also a better rest, so that it's not just the length of time that you are asleep, but it's the quality of that restorative event that allows you to feel better the next day. And guess what? That will reduce inflammation, allowing you to better connect with your prefrontal cortex. And then tomorrow night, you're more likely to implement those recommendations as they relate to sleep. We could talk about nature exposure, about exercise, about diet, about relationships. All of these things enter in to allowing us to connect to the decision-making apparatus that is a gift that we have as humans.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. And just the stuff about sleep specifically, we could go deep into that, but we've covered
Deep
many.
sleep, I like that.
Yeah, right. Very important. And I'm wearing an Aura ring because I track my deep sleep, and I want to know if I'm making changes, are those showing up in the numbers? So if what gets measured gets managed. That's a famous quote from Peter Drucker. So I believe in that I need to know empirically and tangibly what my numbers are for my sleep, for my activity levels, for my heart rate variability, all that sort of stuff.
And, clearly the Aura Ring gives you very important information. It'll tell you what is during sleep, for example, how long did it take you to fall asleep, how much time do you spend in REM sleep, how much time do you spend in deep sleep, and as you mentioned, what is your level of heart rate variability during sleep? We'll have that as maybe another conversation. But this is very valuable information. I recently interviewed the founder of the Aura Ring. A lot of great information, a lot of heart-centered kind of reasons for the creation of this product. And, we need to understand that it's not just that you slept for 7.5 hours. Great, it's a great start. You're ahead of most. But that you did get into some deep sleep for at least an hour or more, activating in your brain the glymphatic system, whereby your brain is going to let you take out the garbage, clean out the metabolic waste that your brain accumulated during the course of the day. New research shows that with interrupted sleep and not fully restorative sleep, that humans who let themselves have a spinal tap the next day in a research study actually have higher levels of markers for what's called beta amyloid. That's the protein aggregates in the brain that correlates with Alzheimer's disease. So we really need to get not just a good amount of sleep, but we have to look at the quality. And what you mentioned is, wow, you can check that every night by connecting your Aura ring, O-U-R-A ring, to your smartphone, and then you get a picture. And I look at that and I wonder, what did I do last evening that might have been disruptive? Was I did I look at my computer screen? Did I eat too late? Did I eat the wrong foods? And it really gives you feedback so that you can move forward. Like you say, you need that data so you can make changes. Cannot overemphasize how darn important it is to get that restorative sleep. I mean, you realize that 1/3 of American adults does not get enough sleep. It's probably one of our greatest health issues. Not enough sleep translates to increased risk for diabetes, for cancer, and even for Alzheimer's disease. And importantly, as I mentioned before, not getting enough restorative sleep increases the likelihood that you're going to make poor food choices, which will make you fat, which will compromise your sleep, which will help you make poor food choices.
Yeah.
So all this feedback that we get, like you're getting with your Aura Ring, very, very important.
Yeah. So I have a few episodes for our listeners to check out if they haven't already that are focused around sleep. James Swanwick Dr. Michael Bruce, and Klaus Pumer in particular. Those 3 episodes are phenomenal. Deep dive into sleep and how to improve that. I'm curious if you've come across BJ Fogg and his research around habit formation, because that there seems to be a piece there that I think could be very valuable, is incorporating that in as well.
Sure. Well, I think back to the Doobie Brothers album, which was called "What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits," and it really gets back to an interesting statement by the Dalai Lama that says the life we lead, that the brain we build reflects the life we lead. That we, through a process called neuroplasticity, figuratively and literally change our brains. We change the wiring, we change the functionality of our brains. And so it really has to do with developing a brain on the plus side that does what we want it to do. And that is to see the world in a positive way, to make good connections, versus a brain that locks itself into what we've been talking about, the impulsivity center. Yeah. So the more you do something, the more your brain changes to reflect that. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity. So 2 things need to happen. First, we should do everything we can to enhance that process of neuroplasticity so that we can take advantage of it. Now, neuroplasticity, the connection of one brain cell to the next, was originally studied by a Dr. Donald Hebb, a Canadian researcher who puzzled over what is it that causes one neuron to connect to the next. And he posited that there was some factor, some event, perhaps some chemical that would enhance this connection. And he didn't discover that. It was discovered much later that there are, in fact, many chemicals, we call them trophic factors, that will enhance the ability of one brain cell to connect to the next brain cell so that we can have these networks develop that are fundamental to learning and to ingraining our habits, to making our habits a part of who we are. So the question is then, what can we do to enhance the process? And it focuses on at least one important of these trophic factors called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. How do you enhance it? That's the gift of growing these connections. It's also the gift, interestingly, of growing new brain cells to start off with. How do you enhance BDNF? One of the most powerful things you can do is exercise. We know that exercise activates the gene pathway to turn on the production of BDNF, leading to more BDNF in the bloodstream, more growth of the brain's memory center called the hippocampus, and better memory function. As was recently described in a study in which 100 individuals were either given an exercise program, well, 50 were given an exercise program, or basically stretching. They were followed over a 1-year period of time, and those 3 metrics were evaluated: level of BDNF in the bloodstream, memory function, and actual size of their brain's memory center, called the hippocampus, on very sophisticated MRI scanning. The group that stretched had a decline in memory, had no change in their BDNF levels, and actually had a brain memory center, the hippocampus, that shrunk over time, as you might expect, since we know that as we age, the hippocampus shrinks. The aerobic exercise group, on the other hand, work by Dr. Erickson at the University of Pittsburgh, demonstrated an increased size of their brain's memory center, growth of their memory center over the 1-year period of time in, again, the group that did the aerobic exercise. So we know we can amp BDNF, and it has really positive consequences. So other things to turn on this connection chemical called BDNF, turmeric, again, aerobic, but also even there's some evidence now that resistance exercise, dietary changes that reduce inflammation, a ketogenic diet, the omega-3 fatty acid DHA, or docosahexaenoic acid, why we think fish is a brain food, which it is.
Hmm.
So these are important things that we should know about. There's one new player called a whole coffee fruit extract. Um, and, for so long, uh, people have been harvesting the coffee fruit. It's not a bean. They call it a coffee bean, but it isn't. I mean, it's not a bean, not a legume. It's a fruit. And they harvest the coffee fruit and take the seed out, which is now the coffee bean, and throw the fruit away. So some enterprising researcher said, gee, maybe the fruit can do something. They found that the extract of the fruit, aside from the bean, has this incredible ability to turn on the production of BDNF, helping us grow new brain cells and, germane to our conversation, helping us with neuroplasticity, helping us choose our habits, choose our what then becomes ingrained in us, allowing us to enhance our ability to learn things and to inculcate knowledge to the extent that it actually changes our behavior when we direct our attention towards positive things. When we maybe turn the news off a little bit and recognize that what we're getting from society around us generally may not always be positive. What we experience on the internet is designed to suck our minds into black holes of emptiness and take us away from the things that really are probably more important, like connecting with people physically, eye to eye, like engaging in connection with nature, like engaging in exercise, meditation, and making lifestyle choices that can be the harbinger towards a better health.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's reminds me of something I learned in Kabbalah class, that when you focus on the darkness, you get more darkness. When you focus on the light, you get more light. And also that when you focus on that darkness or the void or the lack in one area, let's say it has to do with, I don't know, a relationship that's not going well, or your work, then that attracts more darkness, more lack, more void in all the other areas of your life. So I found that pretty profound when I heard that.
It's true. Again, to play on what that quote was from the Dalai Lama, that what we pay attention to physically and functionally changes our brains. And this was, kind of a central theme in the work of a Dr. Michael Merzenich out in California, who really, makes it clear that we are the architects of how our brain is structured, and more importantly, how our brain functions, which means that we play the pivotal role in determining how we see the world around us. And that even the simple process of inflammation, I say simple, truly, it's incredibly complex, how inflammation brought upon us by our lifestyle mismanagement threatens our ability to connect to that part of the brain that allows us to be more human, that allows us to see things from another person's perspective, that allows us to distance ourselves from this us versus them mentality, therefore become more empathetic and be able to plan for the future based upon our food choices, for example. So we are really very, very empowered, aren't we, when we are now understanding that each and every one of us is the architect of our brains, and our choices influence dramatically how we view the world around us.
So true. And I'm curious what your own personal regimen is in terms of eating and morning rituals and sleep hygiene, grounding or earthing, all that sort of stuff. Like, what is your personal set of routines and best practices?
Well, I would say that first, what has inspired me to adopt the changes that we'll talk about in just a moment have been several things. First, I'd say that staying on top of leading edge medical literature, nutritional literature is certainly very influential, because I really, at the end of the day, or even the beginning of the day, I rely on what our best scientists are uncovering.
Mm-hmm.
Second, practicing medicine, interacting with people, as their physician for 3 decades and learning from them what seems to be working and what isn't. Third, rubbing shoulders with learned colleagues and interacting with people at meetings and even by this type of interaction with people like yourself always gives me great information. I think we're on number 4. I have a son who challenges me every single day in terms of what our messaging is, to step it up, and challenging me with other views that maybe not be necessarily on message with what we are saying. And finally, holding my father in my arms when he died of Alzheimer's disease was also very impactful for me on many levels. I mean, it certainly encouraged me to be very open with my outreach and to really push the outreach as far as I can, knowing that what he died of is by and large preventable, but also influencing me, to get back to your question, knowing that because my dad died of a particular disease, there is some increased risk for me, and that motivates me then to make the following changes. First, and I'm not going to rank these because that rank would change day to day based upon what I've been reading this morning, right? Or this afternoon. Sleep, as we talked about, I'll touch upon that because it's so darn important and undervalued in our world, where we think that getting less sleep allows us to get ahead. That, I believe, is a wrong assumption. I think that conclusion is based upon old mentality of sticking your nose to the grindstone and staying up later than those with whom you are competing and being at the office earlier. If you want to be productive, you need to get a good night's sleep. But well beyond that, if you want to reduce inflammation, if you want to reduce your risk for things like cancer, diabetes, coronary artery disease, any of the chronic degenerative conditions, and even Alzheimer's, get a good night's sleep. If you want to be healthy and live a long life, you need to do that. And as you well mentioned, you need to get some metrics as to the quality of your sleep. You have elected to use the Oura Ring, as do I. But even having a laboratory sleep study, good idea. I did that myself as well. So I'm in bed early. I'm in bed now always no later than 9:30. I get a lot of sleep. I'm up pretty early as well, though. I'm up generally by 6 o'clock in the morning. I won't, let's just take it from 6 o'clock on. So in the morning, we have a meditation, my wife and I, and now our son is at home for just a few days, which is really quite wonderful. And then what I do, in fact, I did a Facebook Live about this today, and my wife as well, and anyone else who's here. Crazy enough, we go out on the patio because we have 2 bird feeders out there. And I love our bird feeders. We have blue jays who come first, then come doves, blackbirds, and cardinals. And the other day, we had a rose-breasted grosbeak, which I've never seen before, but I looked it up online. That's what it was. How cool was that? So that's a nature experience in the morning, but certainly not the last nature experience of the day. In the morning, I drink coffee. In the morning, I either run, currently running about 6 miles at a time, or I will go to the gym and lift weights and stretch a lot. Then I come home and I begin to write and read whatever are the latest things sent to me, journals, and begin writing blogs, writing a chapter in a book or a new book or whatever it may be. And then that usually continues till around about 2 or 1:30 in the afternoon, at which point we have breakfast. And for me, it's lately quite a strange breakfast by most people's standards. It's generally chopped kale with avocado, pumpkin seeds, and lots of olive oil. If I want to get really bold, I will put some goat's cheese in the salad. But generally, I don't, in that I want to opt for 1 meal a day being totally plant-based. So I think that's important. Maybe we'll touch upon why at some point. So that's meal number 1 of 2 meals in a day. Not any real protein unless I add in the cheese, which is a little smidgen of protein. Then in the afternoon, I do a little bit more work. I practice guitar each day. And then by evening time, my wife and I get ready for dinner, and that's usually pretty early. That's 5:30, 6 o'clock, which is early by many people's standards. And that's when I will have, with the vegetables or whatever else we're having, some form of protein. And it's either a plant-based protein. I love black beans, for example. I do love Spanish, Mexican cooking. Or it will be occasionally, not occasionally, not at least once a week, some form of seafood, which is wild. I tend to love salmon since I spend my summer in the Northwest. Last summer, my wife and I spent 4 months living on a boat, catching salmon most days, crab and shrimp. So that was quite wonderful. And then after dinner, we go for a walk. And by then the sun's going down, and that's the signal to get ready for bed. It's getting dark. Melatonin levels are rising. Adenosine levels are similarly affected, but more affected by caffeine early in the day, which is why there's no caffeine after 2 p.m. Probably would be good if that were noon. Noon for me, but we recommend 2 p.m. And that is the day. Getting ready for sleep, and that's what we do, and we'll repeat it the next day.
Do you have like a nighttime ritual that helps you to quiet your mind and reduce exposure to blue light and so forth? Like, are you wearing any kind of
Oh,
blue light
well, yeah. I
blocking
mean, I will say
glasses?
that I fall asleep within 2 minutes, so that's not a problem for me. I have other things, I'm not perfect, but I fall asleep very quickly. But I'm just not on the computer at night. We have amber glasses if there's something we want to watch, but we generally haven't been doing that, and sleep is getting just really better and better. So yeah, I mean, if you have to watch TV, or not watch, you have to watch TV, if there's something you must do, you got to get an email out tonight, I would encourage you, that your computer very likely has a night mode on it, as does your smartphone.
Right.
But that said, if not, by all means, the amber-colored glasses are really terrific. So, I think that it's really good to have to get a hobby and to find something that really lets your mind enjoy the moment. And I have several of those. I love fly fishing, so I love to create flies. I like to tie, actually, and this is right where I do it. Here's my fly tying vise, if you really must know. I keep it
Oh,
right here.
wow, that's
I
cool.
spend a lot of time here at this desk. And here are some of my flies that I've tied. I'm not sure you're seeing those,
Yeah.
but I enjoy doing that. It's creative. Every time it's different color, different material, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I play
It
guitar every
reminds
day.
me of a friend of mine, Jonathan Levy, who is also a guest on this show. He's a memory and performance expert, like high performance, like brain sort of stuff. He's got his brand is Superhuman, and
Wow.
what he does is he knits. And he's like, oh, you got
I've
a
always
baby on
wanted
the
to knit.
way. He says, I'll knit your baby a hat.
Oh,
And
that's so cool.
yeah, so the baby's
I
arrived.
have
I gotta
always wanted
collect
to
on
knit.
that
My
one.
wife knitted all summer, all the way up to Alaska and back in our boat. And I really I really would love to learn how to knit. I think that's great.
Yeah, yeah. So because it keeps your hand-eye coordination and your agility, and gives you something to do while you're thinking. Yeah, I think.
I think that would be a really cool thing to do from the perspective of mindfulness, because you have to be mindful. You
Yeah,
have to count your knits and your pearls, or however it works.
right.
And I think that would be a very, very good exercise in mindfulness. I'm going to absolutely look into that. That's a great recommendation.
Yep, yeah. Another thing is to do the. I have these beads. Like, what is that called? It's meditation beads. There's 108 of them, and you just repeat a mantra 108 times. So that's something that I used to do as part of my morning ritual. I dropped that out of my morning routine, but I'm going to add that back in because I think that's going to be
Yeah, and I think that,
valuable.
it brings up the discussion of the practice. What do you do? What is your meditation slash mindfulness slash prayer practice?
Yeah.
And it looks like, from the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, for example, that it may not really matter that much in terms of what it's doing for your brain, all positive. Whether it's mantra-based, whether it is breath-based, whether it's religious prayer-based, or simply some form of mindfulness, that you get benefits across the board. And
Yeah.
it's the regularity of whatever practice that is, as well as, to some degree, the time spent doing that day to day, that I think, is the reason it becomes effective in doing the things that we know it does. It reduces stress, it reduces serum cortisol levels, reduces inflammation, enhances the function of the prefrontal cortex, and suppresses the function of the impulsive amygdala, which is our goal. So one interesting study that I reviewed an hour ago looked at this mindfulness as an intervention for loneliness, for this isolation that is so pervasive across the world and certainly across America, despite this thing that's called social media that is also pervasive, making us more isolated than ever. And they took a group of individuals, I believe it was 50. Half the group was followed over the 8-week period, and the other half was followed, but also was engaged in a mindfulness practice. And what they studied was a metric of loneliness. There's an inventory of loneliness that was developed back in 1980. They asked a series of questions, and based upon those questions, they determined your loneliness rank on a scale. They studied that at the beginning, and they also measured a couple of other blood markers at the beginning and after the 8-week period. Those blood markers looked at levels of inflammation in the blood and also the activity of a gene pathway that controls inflammation in the body. And what they found was very interesting, that, as you probably know where this is going, that those individuals who were involved in the mindfulness program compared to those who were not showed a significant lowering of their loneliness score and showed significant lowering of their inflammation markers, as well as the activation of the gene pathway that is involved in regulating inflammation. So, hey, I'm not going to argue with that. Whether you're talking about loneliness or not, we know that meditation reduces inflammation. And we know that inflammation is central to things like depression and chronic degenerative diseases. And as we show in our new book, Brainwash, inflammation is central to disconnecting us from that gift, the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that fosters good decision making. So
Right.
it's really important to target that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how much time in a day do you spend in the mindfulness practice or meditating?
20 minutes.
Okay. Got it. And do you do any kind of grounding where you take your socks and shoes off and you go walk in the grass or anything like that?
I've been doing that my whole life, not because there was some therapeutic benefit, it's just what I do. So the answer is yes, and I will tell you that it's just how I am, actually how we are. We don't have shoes in the house, and therefore every time we're outside, we're barefoot on the ground. And I've been doing that since I was a little kid, and as have our children. And so again, I've never done that to ground. A good friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Sinatra, actually wrote a book about it and has talked to me about it. And I think it's really got great potential. So I'm doing it. It has never really been part of my messaging, only because I haven't really studied it at great length.
Got it. Okay. And your diet, is it gluten-free, wheat-free, grain-free? Like like to what degree are you avoiding gluten and all that?
Well, I do not have celiac disease, nor do I have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which may be present in 30 to 60% of the American population.
Mm-hmm.
But I still avoid gluten. And why do I do it? Because I think there's enough research indicating that gluten and its effect on gut permeability is a connection, a relationship that is present in everyone. So I don't need to threaten the integrity of my gut lining. Gluten represents that threat. And that's the reason I recommend gluten-free to everyone, not just those who think they have a reaction to it. And certainly it's a powerful recommendation if you have celiac disease. I do not avoid all grains, but at this point, I would say that I actually do. And the reason I do is because right now I'm training and I am really, really restricted on carbohydrates, except for fiber-rich carbs. So would I eat some whole grain rice, or if you can find it, some non-GMO corn? It's pretty hard to find. Probably. But things like a chia seed, yes, I would have that. And other non-gluten containing grains would be at least considered. But right now I'm being super, super aggressive for a number of reasons. It's a very, very stringent diet, and probably for your viewers saying that you don't need to go overboard to the degree that I'm currently going overboard. So that said, again, most of my diet is vegetarian based. Mm-hmm. I opt for at least OMD, 1 meal a day, being totally plant-based. And I'm really limiting protein consumption. And there, I believe, really good reasons for that. And we can talk about that, but just sort of the overview is we realize, that we generally eat too much protein. And we know that protein really is involved in, yes, you need protein for muscle building if you're weight training, which I am, but still limit my protein. But we know that too much protein affects a certain signaling pathway in the body involving some things called IGF-1 and something called mTOR. Let me make that simple, if I may. That, yes, protein through these pathways can be involved in building, but when you build, it's like the old Ecclesiastes verses that were then put into a song by the Byrds. Turn, turn, turn. To everything there's a season. Turn, a time to build up, a time to break down. We want to build up when we're training, but we also have to value the breakdown of our tissues. That's really important. We have to remove damaged parts of the cell. We have to remove damaged cells. We call this autophagy. Auto meaning self, phagy meaning eat. So we have to empower these processes within our bodies to get rid of damaged organelles, parts within the cells that are not functioning as they should be, and even cells that are not functioning very well need to be replaced. So we've got to amp up our surveillance system that goes around and is able to get rid of the defective parts. That is called autophagy. We enhance autophagy when these two things, IGF-1 and therefore mTOR, are lower in terms of their activity. When we have too much protein on board, then these things are not lowered and we don't get to take advantage of autophagy very much. There's a new book coming out actually called The Switch, which really is a book to look for. I'm sure people can find it right now, however they choose to look for books, The Switch. And it really is a wonderful, user-friendly explanation as to how this occurs and what you can do in terms of fasting, calorie restriction, reducing your protein intake to really take advantage of this powerful approach to extend your lifespan and to really help you become much more resistant to chronic degenerative conditions. So I limit protein consumption. I love protein, but now it's down to not a whole heck of a lot. Maybe the size of a deck of cards if I'm eating fish or maybe having chicken.
Okay, and you said this 1 meal a day, completely plant-based. Where'd that come from? Why 1 meal a day? Why not just spread it out over 3 meals, or why not do 2 meals a day? I'm curious where that came from.
Well, there's a wonderful book called OMD, and it focuses on 1 meal a day, and it's written by a Susie Cameron. and I hope to connect with her in the next few days. I just stumbled upon somebody just yesterday who says I'll make the connection. And she makes a very good argument in favor of throwing a wide net. I mean, you could tell everybody, look, you should all be vegan, you should all be vegetarian, you should all be keto, paleo, whatever it is, and you're going to lose a lot of people. But to be more inclusive, in this case, with being on a 1 meal a day plan of being plant-based, that you'll get a lot more people. And I think over the years, we've seen the arguments against the impact of animal proteins, for example, animal products in our diets. People saying, hey, animal products are having a huge environmental impact, using a lot of water, using a lot of resources, etc. You can look for arguments against that, but I really think it's probably valuable information, and I think it's valid information. I, for one, I think turned my back on it for years because I wasn't willing to give up animal products. I think it does make sense. And I think with new information, with reference to life-threatening issues as they relate to consuming too much animal protein through maybe the mechanisms I've just talked about, this autophagy idea and increasing inflammation, it also makes sense. Now, eating animal products, especially sustainable animal products like cheese and eggs, for example, where you're not doesn't have an impact on that animal, that really opens the door then to those who have chosen not to eat animal products because of compassion. And I really want to say that I value that a lot in talking to those individuals who choose vegetarianism, not just from a health perspective, but from the compassion perspective. Yep. That said, that opens the door to things that are sustainable, like eggs and dairy products. Yep. Are there arguments against them? Sure there are. In my day, if you ate an egg, my goodness, terrible things were going to happen to you. You'd have a heart attack the next week. Remember the egg yolk was something to avoid. To this day, you see egg white omelets on the menus at restaurants for reasons not based in science. We know that eating eggs is not associated with coronary artery disease. And as it relates to stroke, eating eggs is actually associated with a decreased risk. So, eggs were taken off the table for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I remember there's this cafe not far from here that has something they call the fitness omelet. And that's an egg white only omelet. And that makes no sense to me.
It's so true. And, I travel a lot, and I often will have my coffee in the morning in the hotel restaurant and look at the menu for breakfast, because I generally bring food along. Avocados travel great, as do boiled eggs. But, you look at the power breakfast, and it's just something, with granola, banana, some pancakes with maple syrup. And that, that's not empowering in any way, shape, or form for your brain, for your muscles, for your body. People seem to equate carb calories with energy, and because people feel the surge of energy. What a big mistake that is. You want to power your body basically with fat, to a lesser degree protein and carbohydrates, in my opinion. We could have a long discussion about why that is. But anyway, so I read this book called OMD, 1 Meal a Day. Really made a lot of sense, and therefore we actually put that in our new book, in Brainwash. The doctor who wrote Grain Brain, that people think was Atkins Redux, which it never was, telling, just describing, or opening up the door to perhaps considering going 1 meal a day plant-based. And that's where we are moving forward.
That's cool.
It is a place of reducing inflammation, increasing compassion, increasing empathy.
Mm. Do you also do intermittent fasting?
I do. Actually, I do. And
what's
that is
window?
A bit of a term. Pardon me?
What's the window? Is it like over 8 hours that you eat?
Or? Could be just postponing breakfast or not eating for 3 days except for water. So, it really isn't well defined.
Yeah.
But, virtually every day I'm involved in intermittent fasting because I have a very large window from dinner, which may end at 7 o'clock, until lunch or break when I break the fast the next day, which is at 12 until 2 o'clock. To be sure, there is some discussion that the coffee I have in the morning might be breaking that fast, and therefore I'm not gaining as much of the benefits. But for me, that's necessary. Then there are days when, probably about once a week, when I won't eat anything until evening time. So it's virtually 24 hours. And to me, as an N of 1, I find that the more my diet is modified so that when I do eat, I'm having vegetables and wonderful sources of fat, the less I eat and the less I am hungry. And I really find that it is having really measurable effects on this N of 1 that I think are really, really positive. And what are my metrics? My running times, my cognitive function, my mood. I'm really pleased with how that's worked out for me. I would say that if challenged, we can go through the literature that supports this and why each of these changes in my lifestyle choices has been effective or could be effective. But plenty of people, you say intermittent fasting, obviously you're then familiar with all the people who are talking about this, the Sachin Pandas and Rhonda Patricks and all the people who are really getting this information out there, that it's very valuable. And frankly, it really, I'm sure, emulates what our hunter-gatherer forebears must have experienced. They didn't have, I can't imagine, 3 meals a day. And I don't know when that was invented. Remember we were told, and then if you have 3 meals a day, you should probably have some snacks in between just to keep your blood sugar level. Well, no. I mean, if you're avoiding refined carbs and sugar, your blood sugar is going to be wonderfully level throughout the day. The way your blood sugar peaks and troughs is when you're challenging your blood sugar by having exposure to sugar and refined carbohydrates. It doesn't take much. There's not a lot of sugar in your blood at any given moment. If you have a blood sugar of 100, which is considered a pretty good blood sugar, you have about 5 teaspoons. You have about 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood, 5 grams of sugar of glucose floating around in your bloodstream. You have 1 teaspoon of sugar in your entire 5 liters of blood floating around in your body at any given moment. Think about that. If you have a blood sugar of 200, wow, that's really high. That's only 2 teaspoons of sugar floating around in your bloodstream in your entire body. So when I present that, it should be looked at in the context of food. When you're eating, I'm saying we have 5 grams of sugar floating around our bodies. Hey, when you drink a glass of orange juice, wonderful fresh squeezed orange juice, high in vitamin C from Florida, great. That's 36 grams of sugar right there.
Yeah,
so
that's a lot.
When you put those two things together, you're not going to absorb all those grams of sugar, but it's no wonder that the foods we eat that have such high sugar spike our blood sugar. And then when our blood sugar is so high, our body says, holy Toledo, we got to lower that blood sugar because it's really high. We pound out the insulin from our pancreas, and then that insulin drives that sugar into our cells, and guess what? Our blood sugars plummet, and then we are peaking and troughing throughout the day and not having a level blood sugar.
Yeah, which is not good. All right,
No,
I know.
and you don't feel great.
Yeah.
And what do? You reach for the refined carbs. You reach for 10 o'clock in the morning, the cheese Danish or whatever is in the vending machine, because you are not going to make it till noon.
Yeah, that's that vicious cycle again.
You bet.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're out of time. I just have one more question, though, that we have an open loop on from earlier, and that was HRV, heart rate variability. What do you look for in your HRV scores? Like, what sort of numbers are you wanting, and what do you do to improve your HRV? Personally.
Let's just for just a moment talk about what is HRV, heart rate variability. And it is, we've been thinking through the years that more regular is always better. Regular hours of sleep, regular exercise, a regular, perfect heartbeat. But when we analyze the heartbeat very closely, we can see that, in fact, there are subtle variations that you're not going to pick up on an EKG. You're not going to pick up when you measure somebody's pulse. And even when you look at an EKG over a long period of time, you're not going to see it because it's too subtle. But new ways of using computer analysis of the heartbeat demonstrate that, in fact, there is variability moment to moment in the heartbeat. It turns out that is a positive, good thing. That is associated with decreased levels of stress. We want to have better heart rate variability, and that is something that improves with exercise, improves clearly with good night's rest, and perhaps one of the most powerful things we can do to improve our heart rate variability, or HRV, is to meditate. Really a very nice relationship there. We know that heart rate variability is associated with lower risk of things like depression and higher levels of compassion. So we want to get it up as best we can, hence meditation. Now, you were describing how on your Oura Ring evaluation at night, one of the things you look at is heart rate variability, as do I. And to me, the higher the better. If you're having your heart rate variability around 35 to 40 up to 50, that's looking really good. So I'm very confident with those numbers. I think they're terrific. And gee whiz, that is a metric that's good to share to your viewers. I mean, everybody looks at, oh, my blood sugar is this. I'm in ketosis. I measured that this morning. I've dropped some weight. I don't weigh as much as I used. My body mass index, my percentage body fat, my LDL cholesterol, whatever it is. But I'm really very glad that you brought heart rate variability into the discussion, because, yeah, it's next generation. It is something that people are not looking at because it's a first derivative of the heart rate itself. And yet now we're looking at that. And, it used to be so hard to get that information.
Right.
But with your Oura Ring. And I would encourage people to visit the HeartMath website to learn a heck of a lot more about HRV and its implications in terms of health.
Yeah. So the first version of the Oura Ring didn't have HRV capabilities, but now with version 2 it does, which is really exciting. Yeah.
And the new version also will allow you to measure HRV moment to moment during your activities, so you can see how your heart rate variability might change, for example, with going into a park and walking around versus when you're in a busy city and fighting traffic.
Yeah. All good stuff. All right. So
real good stuff.
How do we get folks to pick up your new book and to learn more? Maybe you have some online courses or
Sure.
anything like
All right,
that we
lots
can
of
send
ways.
them to.
So the new book is Brainwash, and here's what the cover looks like. And there's a brain, and there's some soap bubbles. And it's Brainwash in a positive way. That's available everywhere. The website for the book is brainwashbook, who knew, .com, brainwashbook.com. My website is drperlmutter.com, drperlmutter.com. And we spent a lot of time, done a lot of work to make that website as informational and as empowering as possible. We have thousands of peer-reviewed studies on the site that is fully searchable in their full PDF form. All my blogs, all my videos are there. The videos I've done interviewing, interesting, wonderful people like you. So that's a great place to go. And let me say, Stefan, thanks for our time together today.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was really, really valuable, really inspiring too. It's great to hear your own personal story, how you apply the stuff that you're eating your own dog food, so to speak. Applying the stuff that you want the
Well,
world
there you go. I've
to
never
apply
actually
in your own
heard
life.
that, but I along the lines of walk the talk maybe might be a little bit better.
Exactly. So
Thanks.
thank you so much. And listeners, please take some action from this. I know that it may seem a little daunting to make all these changes all at once. So make maybe just one big diet change, one exercise change, or something that's going to move you forward and get that momentum going and unlock the power of your prefrontal cortex. This is your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.